Okay guys, Mr. Kruger here, working on the chapter 1. This is our functions review sheet. Okay, now remember, I'm not going to do every problem, but I'm going to give you a good amount of help that you can leave this video understanding how to do the main portions of functions. Okay, so please try to finish the remaining of this due on Thursday, which is the day of our test. Okay, so here we go. The first question. Circle the letter of each graph below that does not represent a function. You may circle more than one if necessary. Okay, so I circled one and I put a box around one. The reason why I put a box around letter A is because A is a function. Okay, the reason why A is a function is because every single input, which are the x values, has only one output, which are the y values. Okay, think about a vertical line. If I drag a vertical line across this graph right here, each time it will only hit the graph one time. If the vertical line hits the graph more than one time, then it is not a function. So if you look at this linear function right here for letter A, it's only going to hit the graph one time every time I drag a vertical line across. That's why it is a function. But if I drag over to F, this is not a function. Because if I draw a vertical line, let's say right here, notice how it's hitting the graph once, twice, and 3 times. That means that that input, that x value, has 3 different outputs. And remember, the definition of a function is each input only has one output. So when the question says, explain why the relations you circled do not represent a function in terms of inputs and outputs, it's because those graphs have inputs with more than one output. Specifically for letter F, the vertical line that I drew, that was an input that had 3 different outputs. Okay, and it could only have one output. What about number 2? Now we're going to talk about tables, so you can actually see the numbers. Okay, so we're just going to look at one of them to see if it's a function or not, and then you have to make that decision. So here's the first table. At x equals -2, the output is 9. -1, the output is 5. 0, the output is 3. 1, the output is 5. And 2, the output is 9. Each input only has one output. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you look at these two, or these two, they repeat the output. But we're only focusing on the inputs. And if you look, each input is different. So each input is only mapped to one output. So you need to find the ones that have an input that are mapped to more than one output. And then you can circle those. Okay, flip it over to the next page. Use the functions below to evaluate each of the following. Now I know what you're thinking, there's so much work here, but you have to be able to evaluate an input to find an output, and then evaluate given an output to find the corresponding input. So let's take a look. First thing, f of 2. Well, since 2 is in the parentheses, it's got to be an input, and when we have an input, we are substituting into the function. Now it says f of 2. So that means that it's function f, which is this function right here, and we're plugging in 2. So whenever I see an x, I'm going to replace that with 2. And then I'm just going to simplify. The left side of the equation stays the same because that's function notation telling us what we're doing. And then I'm going to simplify the right side of the equation. 3 times 2, because multiplication goes first, is 6. And then simplify that subtraction, which is 6 minus 4, which is 2. This is my final answer in function notation. Input 2 into function f, and I get out 2. Okay, now please try B and C, and jump down to D when you're ready. It says f of x, I kind of covered it up a little bit, equals 0. Well, notice it's saying x is the input. We don't know it, but we do know the output, which is 0. So because it's out of the parentheses, it is an output, and when you're given an output, you have to solve for the input. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take function f of x, which is 3x minus 4 up here, and we're going to set it equal to 0. So 3x minus 4 equals 0 because we're trying to solve for this input. And then you just solve a linear equation, which you've done multiple times before. Add 4 to both sides, and we get 3x equals 4. Divide by 3 to undo multiplication, and we get x equals 4/3. But you're not done here, because our goal is to write the final function notation. Which function did you plug in, what was the input, and then what was the corresponding output? So we were talking about function f. We solved for this input, 4/3. That's what we solved for. And we started with the output of 0. So that's my final answer. Please try E and F. Now take a look at 4, our first word problem. I know what you're thinking, it's tough, it's a word problem, but treat it just like every other problem. Inputs and outputs. And then read the problem, which tells you what to actually do here. So it says the function f of c equals 9/5 c plus 32 can be used to convert temperature Celsius into temperature Fahrenheit. Okay, so that's all we're doing. We're going from temperature Celsius to temperature Fahrenheit, and maybe reverse if we're given an output compared to an input. So the first thing it says find f of 20. Okay, 20 is in the parentheses, so it's an input. And that means we're trying to substitute. So we're going to substitute 20 into function f. So f of 20 equals 9/5 stays, and it replaced, let me make that a clearer 5, it replaces the c, which is the input, with a 20 plus 32. And now you just simplify. Okay, so 9/5 times 20, and then add 32, and we get 68. Okay, multiplied 9/5 times 20 first, and then added 32. And this is our function notation. We inputted 20 into our function f, which gives us Fahrenheit out, and we get out 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so my input is Celsius, input, and my output is Fahrenheit. So when it says explain what f of 20 represents, 20 degrees Celsius, because that was the input, is equal to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, because that was the output. If you want to put it in a sentence, you absolutely can. Okay, last page, a few more word problems. I want you to try 5 by yourself. Same type of idea. Talk about which one's the input, which one's the output. Okay, a little hint. If the H is the input, that's talking about hours. So you're plugging in hours, and then C is the amount of money you're going to get out. So input hours, output how much money that person makes. Okay? But let's talk about number 6. Evaluating function given a graph. So we have time is the input, because it's the x-axis, and distance from home is the output. So as time increases, it looks like the person's increasing the distance from home, going away from home, hanging out for a little bit from hour 3 to 6, not going any further from home, then going further away from home from hour 6 to 7, and then finally at hour 7, right here, they're going to start coming back home. Okay, because this right here, at distance equals 0, is they are at home. So they're at home here, and they're at home here. So it says, how far away from home will the biker be after 4 hours? Well, hours is my input. So I'm going to find 4 right here on the x-axis and figure out how far away. Well, it says, if I go across the graph, 30 miles. And that's all you have to do for this. If you want to put it in function notation, you could. D of 4, because that's the input hours, is out 30. But that's up to you. Question C. Evaluate D of 2 and explain what it represents in the context. Use the correct units. So we're talking hours and miles. Well, if 2 is the input, and that's talking about hours, so at 2 hours, the biker is, we got to figure out the output. Well, let's find 2 hours right here, go up to wherever it intersects, and that is 20 miles from home. Okay, last one, letter E. What is happening to the biker from hour 0 to 3? So here's hour 0, and going up to hour 3, that biker travels 30 miles from home. So the biker is riding away from home. Specifically, you don't have to put this, but this just shows me that you really see what's going on. 30 miles away. Okay? So now you've seen a few inputs and outputs. You've got some word problems. But together, that should give you all the materials you need to ace this test. Awesome. See you next class.